Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are, and welcome to today's program and webinar, part of the highly acclaimed series of webinars that ACP, the Association of Contingency Planners, presents for both current and future members. For more information about ACP, visit www.acp-international.com. My name is Ed Goldberg, and in addition to my role with the Corporate ACP Board, I'm the Education Committee Chair. I want to thank Gianna and ACP's headquarters staff in Albany and my good friend Fred Rogers at Continuity Housing for their roles as webinar experts who work behind the scenes to ensure that these webinars happen flawlessly. And a big thanks to our webinar series sponsor, Continuity Housing. Continuity Housing guarantees pre-negotiated hotel rooms at substantial savings for the critical employees of larger and mid-sized companies in order to help prevent a business disruption in the event of a crisis. They've created a patent-pending guaranteed employee housing program which secures and protects hotel rooms for critical personnel and their families if needed while saving companies significant expense. Continuity Housing has a 100% success record with their deployments, and each member of their team has at least 10 years of experience. For information on receiving a free 30-minute consultation about your deployment housing needs, visit continuityhousing.com or leave a comment in the survey that will pop up at the end of the webinar. This and previous webinars are recorded and made available on the ACP website. Please feel free to share the link to the recordings with your peers and anyone you think who might benefit from it. You'll receive a link to the recording after the webinar via email, along with additional information on the topical content. We search the world for the best speakers and the most relevant topical content. And while geographically they may be a few time zones away, they're part of our ACP family. Today's webinar features London-based Patrick Alcantara, Research Associate at the BCI, and Andrew Scott, Senior Communications Manager at the BCI. And they're going to be speaking on the importance of a resilient supply chain. BCI is an ACP industry partner and a longtime good friend to ACP, and we're delighted to have them here today. Contingency planning goes beyond making sure you have your own plans in place. Supply chains are becoming ever more complex, and it's easy to lose track of them. But if you do lose track of them, you could be opening up your organization to a disaster. A disruption anywhere within the supply chain may well have a significant impact on all the other organizations within it. Results from the BCI's annual Supply Chain Resilience Survey show just how big an impact these disruptions can have and how frequent they occur. It's no longer enough to ensure that you have your own contingency plan in place. It's vital to ensure that everyone within your supply chain has one too. Please join me in welcoming Patrick Alcantara and Andrew Scott. Good morning or good afternoon.
Oh, good morning, and thanks for inviting us along to host this webinar on your behalf.
Good morning or good afternoon, everybody, wherever you are. So there's
three main things that we're going to be looking at over the course of this webinar. Firstly, we want to develop your understanding of supply chain disruptions in different sectors across the world, and we'll also be pulling out some of the data specific to the United States. Secondly, we want to provide a benchmark of what business continuity arrangements are in place for supply chain resilience, and this will allow you to see how you compare with other organizations and where perhaps you might need to improve a little bit. Finally, we want to discuss how the supply chain resilience benefits your organization's bottom line. That's, after all, why we work in this industry, and hopefully we help provide value to our organizations. This is the sixth time we've run this survey, and I'd like to thank Zurich Insurance Group who have sponsored it. The aim of the research is to find out more about supply chain resilience and discover what the causes and the consequences of disruption can be. The survey was open over July and August, and over that time we had 525 responses from 71 countries, and about 6 of the responses came from North America. So thank you to everyone who took part. It's your input that makes reports like this valuable, a valuable resource to your fellow professionals in the industry. The full report was published at our BCI World Conference earlier this month, and it's available to download from our website at www.thebci.org. So over the next half hour, Patrick and I are going to talk through some of the results with you, but just to give you a few of the headline figures first. 73.5% of the respondents did not have full visibility over their supply chains. Supply chains are becoming more and more complex with multiple tiers in place, so while managing suppliers might be easy, how effectively can you manage their suppliers, and so on down the line. Why is this a problem? At least 80% of respondents reported that at least one instance of supply chain disruption, and half of these were below the Tier 1 supplier. If you don't have visibility over your supply chain, how can you effectively manage it? Disruptions aren't infrequent, so you need to be prepared to deal with them wherever they occur. And finally, the primary sources of disruptions were unplanned IT, telecoms outage, adverse weather, and outsourcer service failure. And these have been the top three for the last few surveys. These are the same top three also for the United States specifically, although adverse weather is number one rather than IT and telecoms outage.
Thanks, Andrew. So as mentioned earlier, our data suggests that supply chain disruption remains commonplace, with more than 80% of organizations reporting at least one incident this year. Nonetheless, many firms still have yet to achieve full visibility of their respective supply chains. Research findings suggest that almost 3/4 of organizations do not have full visibility. In 2014, 34% do not record supply chain disruptions at all. And while there have been a modest improvement in organizations recording and sharing disruption data firm-wide from the historical rate of 22% to this year's 27%, a lot of organizations still remain in the dark, unfortunately. In the last 6 years, our data paints the picture of the prevalence of supply chain disruptions. So looking at this chart over here, it shows that 81% of organizations report a supply chain incident. And comparing it with historical data, it shows that more than 3/4 of organizations report at least one incident yearly. So that is an increase from what we have observed from our historical data. And breaking down the 2014 figure, we can observe that 42% of respondents experience 1 to 5 disruptions a year, while 1% is affected by more than 51 disruptions. Looking at that extreme end, that pretty much means one incident every week. And this proves that supply chain disruption is almost an inevitable part of business which requires a robust BC capability. Moving on to the origins of supply chain disruption, we can see that incidents now involve more and more suppliers below Tier 1. So these figures of 50% this year are higher than the historical average of 41%. So just looking at Tier 2 and lower, you'd have 50% of disruptions occurring in that tier. And in practice, while a lot of us are just, we just account for Tier 1 suppliers, seeing these figures of Tier 2 and Tier 3 or lower disruptions, they are an important wake-up call. And given how these disruptions affect our bottom line and reputation, it is more important than ever to know who makes up our supply chain, where are they based, and can they be trusted to deliver.
So this slide shows what the main causes of supply chain disruptions can be. You can read them for yourself. I won't read them all out. But as I mentioned earlier, the top three, and for the last few years, has been unplanned IT and telecoms outage, adverse weather, and outsourcer service failure. The top one, IT and telecoms outage, is the #1 disruption period for business continuity professionals, not just relating to the supply chain. And has been so since we started our annual Horizon Scan survey a few years back. Cyber attack and data breach also feature highly in the Horizon Scan survey, but are clearly less of a threat when it comes to supply chain disruptions, as they're quite far down the list in here. Adverse weather features highly, which is no real surprise. Back in the UK, where we're based, we had severe flooding during the last 2 years that caused havoc across our country, and many businesses had to shut down because the building was either underwater or the staff couldn't actually access the building. Of course, I'm sure this impact was insignificant when you look at devastation the weather can cause to other countries, such as the United States. I think anyone living in New York when Superstorm Sandy struck, or in New Orleans when the levees burst, would describe the UK flooding as a small puddle. With hurricanes during the summer months, snow and ice storms during the winter months, it's no surprise that the adverse weather is the #1 disruption in the United States. When you look at some of the other entries in the list, for example, telecoms, IT outage, transport network disruption, more often than not, these are the result of some kind of weather-related incident. Adverse weather has a massive impact on infrastructure, whether it's transport, power, communications, and when infrastructure is down, this can cause massive problems for supply chains. Loss of talent or key skills is an interesting entry to the list, and something that nearly a third of respondents were concerned about. Perhaps this is no real surprise, as disruptions are generally the loss of an asset, and as we're always being told, it is people that are an organization's most important asset. So what are the consequences of supply chain? Again, I'm not going to run through them all. So that was the cause, and now we're going to look at the consequences. The main problem with supply chain disruptions, as with any business disruption, is that you cannot operate as normal. Top of the list is loss of productivity. If your suppliers don't deliver, then it puts you in a predicament, as you may not have the resources you need to operate and meet your obligations to your customers. Perhaps you can find alternative ways of getting supplies in, but this will inevitably cost you, and any failure to deliver could result in customer complaints, which could damage your brand. Reputation is extremely important, and in this interconnected world, a good reputation can be destroyed in minutes. If you look at all the items in the list, the consequences of disruption all either lead to a cost to the organization, whether it's a charge, a fine, loss in revenue, or loss in share price, or they can result in damage to reputation, which in turn is likely to lead to a financial cost.
Andrew has mentioned cost as a consequence of disruption, and I would like to focus on this further. So our data suggests that the cost of supply chain disruption has also increased overall. Organizations reporting at least 1 million euros, or around $1.2 million of losses, have doubled from 12% to 24% in the last 6 years. A look at this year's results reveals that while 40% of organizations lose around 50,000 euros or less, around 60,000 US dollars, the percentage of companies losing more than 10 million euros or $12 million have increased from 4 to 5% in the last 6 years. In the US alone, 18% of companies report losses of at least 1 million euros in 2014, with 4% losing anywhere from 11 to 50 million euros, or around $13.5 to $62 million. And analyzing the 2014 data by sector reveals the following figures: 11% of financial and insurance companies, 21% of professional services companies, 22% of retail companies, 34% of manufacturing companies, and 60% of energy and utility companies experience losses of at least 1 million euros due to supply chain disruption. One of the new questions that we have also introduced this year was related to insuring supply chain losses. Considering the mounting losses due to supply chain disruption, we were surprised to know that almost 40% of organizations have not taken up insurance to cover disruptions at all. Around 10% have insurance cover for at least half of incurred losses due to supply chain disruption. And looking at these findings, this is very worrying, as it likely means that companies write off millions of dollars every year due to losses coming from their supply chains.
So I've mentioned horizon scanning previously, and this is a fundamental part of business continuity or contingency planning. By knowing what your threats are, you're more likely to know what the consequences are that you will have to deal with. So in this survey, we asked respondents to horizon scan their threats. What will be the cause of supply chain disruptions in the near 12 months or medium-term future, looking at about 5 years ahead? So in the short term, you can see there's no real change, although cyber attacks and data breaches are both gaining slight prominence, while weather becomes less of a threat. Perhaps this is because adverse weather has become such a common event that people are better prepared for it. Looking even further ahead, though, cyber attacks and data breaches are gaining a lot more prominence, and the former is expected to be an even greater threat than IT and telecoms outage. Why is this? One can assume that the work we do becomes ever more computerized. Any cyber attack in the systems we rely on could result in a disruption across the whole supply chain. At the moment, I think there's probably a little bit of uncertainty as to how that threat can materialize, what the impact could be, and how we deal with it, and that's probably why it's gaining a little bit of prominence. So how do we resolve the issue of supply chain disruption? Well, one thing's for sure, it's not going to be easy unless you get the commitment of top management. Is this happening? No. The commitment of top management has actually declined over the last year, with only a quarter instead of a third showing a high level of commitment, and a third instead of a quarter showing little or no commitment. So what can we do about this? Hopefully this is where reports such as this can be helpful to you, as they can be used to demonstrate to top management that supply chain disruptions are a threat and that they are costly, a cost which is not always recoverable, as Patrick highlighted just a few slides ago. Putting some basic measures in place to ensure that not only your own organisation strives to achieve resiliency, but also those within your supply chain could help prevent some of these costs and therefore provide value for money to top management.
Andrew was spot on in saying that building supply chain resilience provides value for money. Our survey relates that with having business continuity arrangements. And in that regard, there are some encouraging signs in building supply chain resilience. So looking at the data, it shows that the uptake of business continuity arrangements related to supply chain disruption, there has been a clear movement towards its adoption. So from 58% of companies reporting BC arrangements in place for supply chain disruption in 2012, when we first asked this question, it has now increased to 72% in 2014. In the US, 67% of companies report having BC arrangements in 2014. And when you break down that data for industry sectors, you will see varying figures with 86% of financial and insurance companies, 73% for retail and wholesale, 67% for manufacturing, 68% for professional services, and 79% in energy and utility companies having supply chain BC arrangements. And segmenting the data also reveals that small and medium-sized enterprises are less likely to adopt supply chain BC at 64% compared to large businesses 76%. This is definitely one finding that should be given more attention in the following years. And analyzing how companies seek supplier insurance, or assurance rather, reveals a movement towards looking for evidence of alignment or certification against standards such as ISO 22301. Comparing historical data with this year's results suggests an increase in the percentage of companies asking for evidence of alignment to standards from 38% to 45%. More importantly, the percentage of companies asking for certification from their suppliers has almost doubled from 21%, which is the historical average, to 40% this year. Nonetheless, a gap still exists as companies have been less keen on checking the credentials of individuals who run a supplier's BC program. In 2014, only 21% report doing so, which is quite telling. I mean, at the end of the day, we don't just deal with companies, but with people. If we check the credentials of professionals who do heart surgery, for instance, why shouldn't we do the same for people we entrust our company's business with? Looking at the validation behavior of organizations worldwide, we notice a consistent gap as revealed in the data. So while there has been an increase in checking evidence of supplier BCM as suggested by historical data, the findings also say that most companies stop there. In fact, 53% of companies at present do not validate supplier assurance at all, an increase from the historical average of 47%. Validation behavior such as running joint exercises at 20% or observing supplier exercises at 16% have remained basically unchanged, while documenting outcome reports and action plans have dipped significantly throughout the years.
So the next few slides talk a little bit about the benefits of supply chain resilience, and they include quotes from some of the respondents from the survey. We've got 3 quotes coming up, so you've got the first one on your screen. Communication is key to ensure appropriate plans are activated before the impact is felt within the organization. If you're experiencing disruption, often you don't want to let your customers know for fear that others may take competitive advantage. However, if your suppliers give customers warning, then it allows them plenty of time to make alternative arrangements or even provide the supplier with support to help them recover. After all, it's in everyone's interest that a disruption is avoided. The second one talks about reputations, and reputations can be saved. Crises do happen. Whatever mechanism we put in place to prevent them, they still happen, and that's why we have business continuity and contingency plans. If we have a process in place to deal with disruption, then we're less likely to suffer the reputational damage as a result of any disruption taking place. And the next one talks about reputation yet again. With effective supply chain management, customers and suppliers can work together to ensure that a disruption does not become a crisis. Reputations can then be enhanced through cooperation rather than damaged by the disruption.
So in conclusion, the BCI Supply Chain Resilience Survey has been useful in tracking supply chain disruption and BC arrangements which contribute to supply chain resilience. In the last 6 years, we have consistently noted the prevalence of supply chain disruption. As such, it may be safe to say that supply chain incidents are almost inevitable, and a robust BC capability can help in ensuring resilience amidst disruption. Nonetheless, top management commitment is essential in building that robust BC capability. The challenge remains for BC and resilience managers to build a case for supply chain resilience to top management. More importantly, seeking supplier assurance and validating this assurance is the key to ensuring that robust capability. As such, it requires an understanding of your whole supply chain from end to end. At the end of the day, a company must be able to answer these 3 questions in order to build supply chain resilience. 1, who are my suppliers? 2, where are my suppliers based? And 3, can they be trusted? Should you wish to know more about our supply chain study, you can contact us through our details in this slide. And you can also download the BCI Supply Chain Resilience Survey 2014 or the results of our trend analysis from 2009 to 2013 for free in our website. Thank you very much, and we are ready to answer your questions.
Okay, great presentation, and we've got some great questions. So we have an engaged audience. David asks, please define what you mean by full visibility of the supply chain.
Well, this is talking about not just knowing what your suppliers' BC arrangements are, but also looking at their suppliers as well and going down the line. So it's not necessarily you analysing the final supplier, but certainly make sure that who you're dealing with is resilient and they have a process in place to make sure that who they deal with is also resilient.
Mm-hmm. And then another way we measure the visibility of supply chains is by companies recording supply chain disruption, because one of our assumptions in the survey is if you don't record or your entire firm doesn't know the disruptions that you experience in your supply chains, then more or less it's a blind spot. So it communicates that you don't have full visibility of your supply chain. So definitely these two indicators of visibility are very much important, and those are a few of the indicators that we have considered in our survey.
Great, thank you. Thomas asks, what is your definition of tier suppliers? 1 versus 2 versus 3 and so forth.
So we simply define supplier tiers by the relationship tier companies. So say, for example, a tier 1 supplier is your immediate supplier, and then tier 2 would be a supplier of a supplier, and then lower tiers would have that similar relationship as well. So like tier 3 would be the supplier of a supplier of a supplier. So it gets so as you can see, supply chains are pretty much a very complicated network of suppliers, and somebody's tier 1 can be somebody's tier 2 or tier 3. Obviously, what a possible logical conclusion to like accounting for all tiers is like, shall we ask for like all the suppliers of our suppliers? But our research shows that what is important is not necessarily for you to have like detailed information on all your suppliers, but having that contact information for having that contact information for your main suppliers, as well as knowing the dependencies or the suppliers of these suppliers and making sure that you can contact them in case something goes wrong.
Great. On this one, I hope it doesn't cause trouble, but you may have to go back in the slides. It's up to you. Cecil asks, is there a way to quantify the value of certification, both to the organization as well as to personal and professional development? So, you know, to put a dollar value is what it sounds like for the organization as well as for the person seeking the certification.
Well, that's actually a very good question. But well, looking at some of the research that we have done. So, for example, we have research when it comes to certification. It does show that having certification or having professional credentials does pay and does and is likely to lead to, say, new business or increased assurance among our customers. Obviously, the quantifying the dollar value of that would be quite hard because we cannot really just trace the benefits solely to certification. But then again, anecdotal evidence suggests that it's likely to have an effect.
It would also depend on the organization itself, what sector it's in, what size it is. So there's a number of other factors that would come into play when it comes to trying to attribute a dollar value to it.
Terrific. Great questions. We've got some more. Art has asked, what about having a plan B and plan C in case of changes in the loss of supply chain? So, you know, how far down do you go? How deep do you go? How do you make that decision?
Well, actually, we keep on, as we present this data, we keep on getting asked, how far do you go? And more or less, it's always that question, how far do you go when it comes to planning for your supply chains? But I guess the best answer to that is basing it on risk. So knowing which suppliers are the most critical, and knowing which parts of your supply chain are the riskiest, and you can make your contingency plans from there.
This is why it's quite important to do the horizon scanning, because if you know what the threats are, then it's slightly easier to then plan to deal with those threats.
Okay, very good. I'm trying to keep up with the questions while you're answering, so forgive the pregnant pauses there. Royal asks, how do you rank the criticality of the suppliers?
That is a very good question, and our research suggests that different companies use different methods in order to track the criticality of their suppliers. So some of them do focus on the amount that they spend for a particular product or service. Some of them measure it through the projected loss in case this particular product or service does not get to them. And personally, I would say that it should be something that is it should be something that must be specific to your company. Possibly, a way to do that is through doing a business impact analysis. So you can measure the impacts of supplier failure to your own company, and you can make your contingency plans from there.
I think only the organization itself can decide what their critical or who their critical suppliers are. So as you say, that business impact analysis is quite crucial to determining that. Look at which suppliers you feel you rely on, and then make sure there's processes in place to handle the loss of that supplier or the disruption to that supplier.
Very good. Same person, Royal asks, are there international standards for supplier resilience, like 22301?
Well, speaking of standards, so ISO 22301 in general covers business continuity, and it could be a good start. Say, for example, you would want to you would want to get assurance of business continuity arrangements for your suppliers. We have another standard in the UK which has been recently published, which is PAS 7000, which is a standard that seeks to pretty much streamline the questionnaire, if you may say so. Like, because we normally give out questionnaires to our suppliers before we tender new business, for example. And the PAS 7000 proposes specific modules or specific questions that you may ask them in order for your suppliers to show compliance or to show assurance of business continuity, or to show resilience.
Okay, great. We've run through the questions pretty quickly. I'm watching to see if any more come in, and if anybody else has anything, go ahead and send it in. Anything else that you folks want to expand on? We do have a few minutes, so if you want to emphasize anything, maybe tell us a little bit about BCI. Feel free.
Okay, well, to tell you a little bit about the BCI, we've been going for 20 years now. We were founded in 1994 by a group of people who work in business continuity. We are a membership-based organization. We've got about 8,000 members who are probably, I think, about 40% are UK-based, and the remaining 60% are overseas, with a large chunk of those in the United States. So we provide a kind of professional body for those people working in that industry. We also provide certification in the industry, so we've got several training courses that we run, and one of them is for our CBCI course, which is the certificate of the BCI. And that's a course based on our good practice guidelines, which are the guidelines for how to adapt your organization to comply with ISO 22301, the international standard in business continuity. So that's kind of one of our main training courses. And then we've got a few others as well. And we've got a series of master classes which we've run in the UK for this last year, but we're now looking at expanding overseas. And they look at some of the more practical side of business continuity. So one of them is on supply chain resilience. Another one is on how to do a business impact analysis. Off the top of my head, I can't remember what the other ones are.
And then on the thought leadership side, so the BCI provides resources to its members and the general practitioner community about business continuity related topics. So one of the topics that we are very much interested in is supply chain resilience, and we have been doing a survey with a survey on supply chain resilience for 6 years now, which provides data for this webinar. And we've also got studies on horizon scanning, as Andrew mentioned. So we are now running the 4th horizon scan survey, in which we are asking professionals in industry sectors around the world about threats to their businesses in the next 12 months, as well as further ahead. And we've also got other research studies on the future of business continuity, as well as building skills and competencies for future and existing BC professionals.
Very good.
All the research reports that we've talked about so far, they are available for free on our website. You can download them at thebci.org. And you can also find new surveys that appear as they come along on our website. Or find us on Facebook, Twitter, or LinkedIn if you wish.
Sure, very good. We have a link to your site as well on our ACP website too, so that works. Very good. Well, before everybody leaves, I want to, if folks would stay on the line for 30 seconds, I've got some valuable information for you. And before that, I want to thank our presenters, Patrick and Andrew. Thank you so much for a great presentation. And I'd also, again, like to thank ADG and their webinar experts. And, of course, Continuity Housing for sponsoring the entire ACP webinar series. Remember to visit continuityhousing.com or leave a comment in the survey if you're interested in how they can provide your critical employees guaranteed housing when they need it most. Be sure to watch the ACP website for announcements of future webinars. This, as a reminder, and previous webinars are recorded and made available on the ACP website Please feel free to share the link to the recordings with your peers and anyone you think who might benefit from them. You'll receive a link to the recording after the webinar via email, along with additional information on the topical content. And there'll be a brief survey that'll pop up when you close the browser right now. And if you would please take half a minute to answer the questions there. We find that very helpful in refining these productions, both topically and on who's speaking. It drives what we do, and hopefully we can hit topics that you find engaging. Thanks for attending today, and thanks for presenting, Patrick and Andrew, and I hope you all have a great day.